Welcome to this week's episode of Tech on Tap. My name is Adam Herman with DataBank's technical team. Today we're going to be reviewing how to keep your custom code up to date with your ever-changing environment. For today's introduction, I'm excited to introduce Scott, who's all the way up here from Dallas, Texas.
Hi, I'm Scott McLean. I run the software development team here at DataBank.
So for today's episode of Tech on Tap, we're going to be reviewing beer from Equilibrium out of New York. Usually our guests are bringing in beers from their hometown, but some that fly in, we're picking up beers that fit their personality or look just like them. So today, Scott, we're going to be going through and we're going to be trying a DIPA, a double India Pale Ale, MC squared.
Oh, splendid.
I know. You can take this home. It's basically a photo of you from the last time I seen you, looking like Einstein. We'll see how that pour looks. Oh, that was just about as bad as the last one.
Go catch it, frothy.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so sorry about the phone there, but each episode of Tech on Tap, we're gonna give a rating to a beer. It's gonna be a 1 through a 5. Everyone has a different taste. Everyone has a different beer style they like. You know, I've tried a few different ones, but if you want to give her a try with me here today and give her a rating, and see where we go.
We'll sludge it up. Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that one?
it's drinkable. I mean, it could deal with being a little more bitter. Frankly, it's a little happier than I am, but
That's Scott. I like to say a lot of things are happier than you are, but you know,
I mean most things. But no, it's nice.
you have to give her a rating from a 1 to 5. What would you give her?
Am I allowed to use decimals?
You can do whatever you want.
3.5.
3.5. Okay. I'd probably give it about a 4. I like some of those hoppier beers.
Yeah, it's got a nice hoppy taste. It's not as floral on the nose, and it's just a bit sweeter than you really want out of an IPA.
Yeah, I can see that. I think a lot of people prefer the sweeter.
Got the nice orangey note on the aftertaste, though.
It's got that good color too.
Sure, yeah.
All right, so we give it a 3.5 and a 4. So we're going to come in at a strong 3.75 for the rating of this beer today. All right, Scott. So thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be covering custom code and making sure it's up to date with the solutions and the environments that we're talking about. So, I'm going to jump right into why we're talking. So when companies or we're engaging in new projects, what are some of the things that have been missed on the custom development side?
So probably one of the biggest risks anytime you're upgrading a complex system is that along the way you've bumped into places where there are gaps in your requirements. The thing that you bought does 99% of what you need it to, but there's that 1%. And you bring somebody in to bridge that gap and it just works. And everybody forgets that it exists, it's sitting there, it chugs along year after year after year, but all of a sudden some piece of technology, whether it's an old codec for an image style, or whether it's VB script, or something else that just gets canceled in sort of the IT world, makes a piece of that solution unviable. But no one's thought about it for years because it's been sitting there, and it winds up being the biggest risk factor because once you change the environment, once you make it a place where that thing can't be, now you have a broken system until somebody comes in and repairs it. So probably the most vital piece of that is to plan ahead, take a look at what's in your system, understand why those pieces are there, and what you can do about them in advance to make sure that you're ready to change the environment.
So what about the scenario where you've acquired a system? The companies do acquisitions. They don't always know what's out there.
Sure.
So what's a good way to figure out what's not native to software, what may break with the new environment or new computing or, what we're doing out there? How would you go about starting to even look?
Sure. In almost any environment, no matter what piece of software you're working with, there's going to be some kind of an interface where you set up those automations. There's a method through which they connect, and within that, you can usually find yourself a list to start from of those pieces that are customized. And those pieces can be a little bit insidious. It's not just scripts. It could be things like an HTML form. It could be little components that have been built over time, but they're in there. And as long as you know what categories to look for, you can find those lists configured within your body of software.
So after you start engaging and you've identified what needs to be updated, right? How do you know what's compatible with what system?
Right. And well, that's an experience thing. You have to know what's the state of the market. You have to know what are the components that are changing. Is it the upgrade of the software platform? Is it a change of an operating system? Are you implementing a new database architecture that might bring in new data types? All sorts of different components there, and understand what is and is not compatible. And then you have to have some kind of method for actually scouring the pieces that you've added to figure out, well, these are the parts that are going to break. And sometimes it's going to be an entire thing. When we take the example of VB Script, for example, Microsoft has recently deprecated that entirely. They've stated that the next generation of operating system kernels will ship without the engine that runs it. And so now we have to start thinking of a future where those have to be eliminated in their entirety. But HTML, for example, it's going nowhere. It's not going to change, but the component pieces that run underneath it are. And so we have to know, when I'm emulating a browser, when I'm displaying a form in a piece of software, am I looking like old Internet Explorer 9? Am I running on Chromium? Am I emulating Mozilla and Firefox? Well, what's the situation that I'm in? And based on that, what are the component pieces in the underlying scripts that may fail? Having a list of those and being able to examine your custom code for them puts you in a position where you're ready to make the changes that are necessary.
So it sounded to me a lot like a majority of what we're talking about when we're getting in there, and we're going to be updating systems, we're going to be updating environments. It sounds like you're doing a lot of discovery.
Absolutely, absolutely. But that kind of discovery can be accelerated because you know that there are a limited subset of categories. And within each of those, there are a limited subset of factors that could be broken. And if you come up with a mechanism through which you can analyze those, you can speed up that discovery process by knowing what it is that are the risk factors.
So let's just say we got through modernization of the solutions that we have, where everything's up to date. What can we do as we're developing new to even make that go faster for the future? Is that documentation? Is that, what is that? What does that look like?
So it depends on the arena in which you're speaking. If we're talking about custom code solutions, something that's actually executing a custom script or an external automation, you want to make sure that you're building on current generation software. So in the coding world for many systems these days, that means you're either building in .NET or you're building in Java or you're building in something that has a current tier architecture that's ready to stand the test of time. In terms of an E form, for example, an HTML form, you might be saying, well, I need to build in conjunction with something that is cross-browser compatible, something that is cross-version compatible, something where I don't have to, in the long term, be responsible for the upkeep.
Let's just, I'm running an IT organization, and we got a lot of systems out there, and we put a lot of custom code out there. What would I be looking at? I'm not a developer, right? You know, when I'm looking to update systems, you know, I'm going to be talking to new vendors. I'm going to be talking to new software. What should I be looking at outside of just the new software? Because if I replace one thing, all that code's got to be rewritten.
Well, just because you're not a developer doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking to one. Quite frankly, when there are custom components, and there usually are in a robust system, you need to have a developer involved. You need to have a developer who not only understands code, but who understands that platform and can put you in a position to say, here are your risk points, and here's the effort that it's going to take to fix them. And here's a path for fixing them before you upgrade, before you change that environment.
So if we're planning ahead, we've got everything set, we're starting new projects. I know I just asked this before, but is there a way to have the code structured, documented, prepared, so that it's not left behind and found mid-project?
I mean, there is. It's not usually done, but that's simply documenting your solution. And that kind of takes us into a different question, which isn't how do I update my codes? Should I update my code? There are questions you should be asking way before what's it going to take to update this piece of custom code. You should be asking, what does it do? Is that something that's necessary for me? An example is one of the systems with which we work, when it was originally created, had no mechanism in workflow automation to update a keyword. And so scripts were written to do that. And we'll get into systems today. We're talking 20 years later where those scripts are still in place. Well, that's not serving a purpose. There's not a point in upgrading that. Other times we see that there's something that's been running continuously for 15 or 20 years, but no one's using the output of it. It's actually just a drain on resources and it doesn't need to be updated. And other times we find out that really people have just been chugging along, working within a process that doesn't work well for them because it wasn't broken. And instead what we really need to do is we need to examine the process, which often means either eliminating or replacing that custom component with something that does something different.
And Ian, and the reason I asked that is a lot of software, you'll get notices of updates are required, right? But that custom code, you don't get that.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out how we get ahead. Did I hear that right? You're talking about like basically solution assessments, system assessments, regularly checking what's viable
Yes.
and not as you're moving.
Yes, I mean, you're spending a lot of money, to be perfectly frank, on the system. You should know what that system does for you. You should know whether there's value in what it does. And when you're approaching time to spend a lot more money upgrading that system, you ought to have an idea of these are the pieces that I need to look at. And if you don't, you ought to get somebody to help you figure that out in advance so that you have that list and that as you add new components, they become part of that documented system so that you can reevaluate on a regular basis.
You know, being a developer and having a development team out there, you know, what are some of the gotchas that you got pulled into, like, not just in the last year or so? We're jumping into we're upgrading a system. What are some of the things that even a developer may have a hard time with?
Have a hard time solving or have a hard time knowing that it's going to be a problem?
Both. Maybe it's custom. Maybe it's you just need an SME on the system that can tell you what's going on, or maybe it is, hey, you know, this code was written by someone else. That happens all the time.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. From a developer's standpoint, whose code it is kind of an irrelevancy. Yes, there's good code and there's bad code, but at the end of the day, if you can read code, you can read code. So solving the problems isn't so much the problem. Knowing what the problem is the problem.
So how do you get there? Does that require someone to walk through what the business process is doing?
It genuinely does. You have to understand what it is that's the intended output of something, especially once it's broken. And very frequently, you know, when we're talking about, well, what are the problems that programmers run into? The problem is that nobody did engage a programmer before the environment changed, and now everything is broken.
Yeah.
And we don't need to just fix a problem. We have to know, well, what was it actually doing before it stopped doing things? And that's where having an understanding of the system and digging in with a subject matter expert is really going to make a lot of difference for us.
Yeah, I know a lot of these legacy systems that we've been working with, though, the folks that have put them in place, they're not there. The developers that were part of that aren't there. You know, it's that reoccurring staff, you know, and that happens. If I was that IT lead that I was talking about earlier, I would be having to look for an SME that knows the processes.
Yes.
I'd have to find a developer that can talk to what we have in the system. So trying to be preventive and not break things would be my goal.
Sure.
But I know that's not always going to be the case. A lot of projects will start to cultivate some of those, you know, nuances that are out there in custom code that people don't realize are out there.
Right.
Those, even just a simple API, you know, with an upgrade could break.
Sure, but so you mentioned a subject matter expert who's familiar with the process. Almost all of the time, that's not someone who's familiar with the design, and it doesn't need to be. It's someone who actually does the job. It's great for someone to say, well, we designed this so that it would make sure we lumpfix the Gingover-Schneffler. But the reality is that at the end of the day, I don't care about Gingover-Schnefflers and they don't mean anything to me. What I need to know is from this end user, oh yeah, when I click this button, I see a number in this block. oh, okay, now I know what your problem is. I know what feature you're looking for, and I can approach making that happen.
I think that helps me out a lot too. A lot of times when we engage in any type of an upgrade, right, any kind of new development or code, I think the missing piece is understanding what the process is.
Correct.
We just know something's broken.
Yep.
So the delays in getting moving are understanding the process. So document your process, have someone come in and understand it with us.
And especially when you are creating custom code in the first place, and I know that this is possible when you're looking at a legacy system, but as you're adding new custom components, documenting what was the problem you were trying to solve in the first place. It's one thing to know how it works and what it does. It's a much more important thing to know, well, what was the intent behind it? More often than not, I will get some very specific questions where I'm asked, can you solve this extremely targeted, intricate detail with software? I'll think to myself, yes, I can, but why? And I'll find that the reason is because we've already tried to solve something 4 layers deep that we could have solved once at the beginning, and now we're stuck on this very technical detail. And because we've lost sight of what the original problem was and we're just solving process, we're making a mistake and we're actually adding long-term risk to a system. So understanding what the original intent was is often more important than what the process is, because we can make a new process.
If there's one thing you could have going into a new project, being a developer, having to update anything, what would that be, or what would your recommendation be?
Talk to the people who do the job.
Okay.
Find out from them what they want. Do not imagine that this is an optimal solution and the people will just learn to use it, because the biggest breaking point in custom solutions and the biggest problem with adoption is that they're designed without taking the end user into account.
Trying to summarize a little bit of what I'm learning here today as we talk. An SME or end user is going to be key to any development update, even new development, right? The documentation of what you have is going to be great, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to go in and look at what has been developed when you're
Yes.
doing updates.
At the end of the day, the environment always changes. Sooner or later, you're going to be in a situation where software components don't run anymore. The reason you're upgrading your system in the first place is because it's been modified to be ready for current day operating systems. It's been modified to be ready for current day database architectures. You wouldn't make the attempt to install a copy of Microsoft Works 2.0 from 1994 onto your Windows 11 computer, and you certainly wouldn't panic when it didn't, because you'd understand, oh, this is an environment this was designed to run in. The same thing holds true with your custom software. It doesn't have a permanent shelf life. And so you need to be ready for the fact that if you're upgrading a component, you need to be aware that other components could be at risk as well.
I'm liking the analogies you got going here today for us. So change one thing, check the rest.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing. So wrapping it up, Scott, with one last question. What would your recommendation be to others that are looking to make any changes within their environment? I mean, it could be any system.
Yeah, I guess the most important factor is to realize that one piece of software isn't a system. The system is an entire ecosystem of software components that are interacting with one another. And some of those are custom and some of them aren't. But if you change any one of them, it's going to have a domino effect. It's going to affect all of the others, and you need to be aware of where the risk points are when you make those changes.
So really understanding the full ecosystem, and one change could flip it all over without the right updates.
Yes, yes.
Wrapping up today's episode of Tech on Tap. We got to go through and rate a beer from Equilibrium out of New York. MC Squared is a pretty good beer. It is a DIPA. We gave it about a 3.5 rating. We also got to spend some time with Scott McLean talking through custom development, keeping it up to date as we continue to make changes within our ecosystem, our technology, and making sure that no code is left behind.